right, welcome back to Dynamics Unplugged. Happy Master Planning Monday to everyone. Today we're going to have a quick look at master plans. Why would you want one versus many? What are the different types? What are the use cases? And how can we really set them up to optimize our supply chain? So let's get started. We're going to navigate to master planning, go into setup, plans, master plans. And I think for a lot of you, if you're new to AX or Dynamics D365, you'll see that this is a fairly traditional setup in demo environments. A lot of times even consultants will start with this as their base setup for plans. For new companies, you might see two plans, one called static and one called dynamic plan. So maybe let's start there. What is the difference between a static and dynamic plan? Do you need both? Why would you want to use both? So I'm going to switch instead to our master plan parameters. We'll come back to the plans themselves in a second. You can actually see that there is options to select default current static master plans and current dynamic master plans, as well as a parameter to copy the dynamic plan from the static plan when it runs. So what really is static and dynamic? Really think about what those two words mean. So static, it's not moving. It's our long-term operational plan. We're typically running a full regeneration of our entire supply chain. A really long-running static plan. A lot of the origins of having these two different plans and their purposes is for performance reasons, right? The longer we go out into the future to look at demand and supply and on hand, the more calculations we're running, it can grow pretty exponentially versus a dynamic plan, something that's smaller, that's running fast, that's running quick, that's reacting to changes. So one of the reasons is for not having to run a full regeneration operational plan. When master planning is run on your database, it can take a really long time, which is how we got to where we are today with planning optimization. But for a lot of companies in manufacturing who aren't using planning optimization yet, that's still a consideration. So the static plan might be something you run once weekly or monthly versus a dynamic plan that might run nightly for a smaller amount of increments. The other big difference with the dynamic plan is it sees new demand instantly. If I'm in a form like net requirements, or if I'm in doing an explosion, it uses that dynamic plan. So for example, let's go to an item in our release products, and we'll see when we go to net requirements that we actually have the ability to look at both plans. So if I click on net requirements for Drew's Gray IPA, I'll see the different plans that are available. And if I were to create a sales order right now in real time for this item, I would see that in the dynamic plan. I'd see a line here for sales order, depending on which warehouse it was sold out of. So let's say like somebody just entered this one, I would see that here. The plan wouldn't react to it, but I would see that demand immediately. It's dynamic. If I looked at the static plan, I would not see that in real time necessarily. I would need the master plan to run and to regenerate. So your dynamic plan's getting that demand in real time. It's not reacting to it. It's not regenerating planned orders or messages or anything like that in real time. You still have to run a dynamic plan to pick that up, but it will see that demand immediately. So a couple big differences with those two planning types is what visibility they have and typically why people would use them, right? So there's usually a lot smaller time fences on that dynamic plan. You're concerned with the immediate. What am I doing in the next week, month versus what's the whole year? I'm forecasting and everything else that's involved. Maybe that dynamic plan is using capacity planning where your static plan might not be. So we do have the ability to run both. There are a lot of implementations where you might have one plan that is both the static and dynamic. That is an allowed setup. Could be recommended for simplicity's sake if you don't have a lot of complex planning needs and you don't want to confuse people. Then you could have the same plan being a single plan. What are other reasons, though, why you would want multiple master plans? Yes, you have a default static and a default dynamic, which are used, but you might want multiple plans for lots of different reasons. Maybe you have complex forecasting needs and you don't want that to affect the day-to-day operational plan, but you do want to simulate it. You could have forecast models that are tied to only specific plans that are run as needed to see the full effects on the supply chain in terms of lead times and capacity. Include on-hand inventory. I have worked with some manufacturers where they have certain runs of parts where they don't consider on-hand inventory. It's a very stable manufacturing environment. They want to forecast and level load per week, per month, whatever it may be, no matter how much inventory they have, because it's so consistent. They might have a plan where they only run those items and do it off of the forecast versus off of considering on-hand inventory and other supply as well. Overriding the on-hand inventory for consuming our safety stock or our on-hand inventory. Do you want to include inventory transactions? If you do, a lot of inventory journals, a lot of scrap, or a very big reason, something we see a lot in retail and companies who do a lot of quoting for dealers in certain industries is include sales quotations. It's very common to have a separate plan or even maybe your main plan that's including sales quotations that are at an expected win rate of a certain percentage, because if they are maybe based on your tight lead times or certain constraints, you'd want to be able to plan for that ahead of it being converted to an actual order. So you allow those higher projected sales quotes to hit your master plan, or you have a separate plan that looks at quotes while your operational plan only looks at true orders. That's a powerful way to give some of that simulation, some of that flexibility to your planners and buyers so they can see what's coming and react to it rather than wait till it's too late. Using shelf life dates, if you have a lot of SKUs where some of these parameters really affect performance, once again, in the days of prior versions of Dynamics, or those of you who aren't able to upgrade to planning optimization yet, these things might still be a consideration where you need to segregate certain items or groups of products or resources at the plan level as well. So you have those parameters, you can tie them. And then I mentioned forecasting. That's another big one for simulation planning, where you might have customer provided forecasts, you might have system generated forecasts, a third party tool, you might have your sales reps providing their industry knowledge and their projected forecast for the year, and you want to see what is the output or what are the effects on your planned orders, what are the effects on your production resources based on the current state if those forecasts were to be actualized. Having a separate master plan to do that is a really good example of why you might want to have that level of control. And those naming conventions can definitely be specific to your company. One of the things you need to consider when setting these up, right, is what that naming convention actually means to your users. Static and dynamic, those are Dynamics terms. Those are Microsoft terms. Not all ERPs use that. Not all businesses use that terminology. And the other thing that goes along with those naming conventions is defaults that happen when I open forms. So for example, I go into planned orders, the very first time I go in, it might not be the static plan that shows there. So make sure when you're training your users, when you're testing, that you're aware of how to, one, switch plans, make people aware of which plans they're in when they're making decisions, because if you do set up simulation plans that you don't want people to actually to transact against or to take some of those planned orders against, if those are true simulations versus operational, they need to make sure they're in the right plan to firm orders. Same thing in net requirements, they can toggle back and forth between plans. I think there's always an assumption that it's defaulting to the static plan or it's alphabetical, and that's not always the case. So use things like the new advanced filtering tools, personalization tools, saved filters, saved favorites, so that users, who operate in specific plans, if you do have multiple or even many, when we get up to multiple, 5, 10, not that that's very common, but that users are in the correct plans to make their decisions and to review their data. So as you can see here in my environment, I have 4 different plans I can toggle between to see planned orders, and I want to make sure that I'm in the correct one when I'm reviewing these for firming. Same thing, like I said, when it comes to net requirements. If I were to go into my requirement profile, I want to make sure that if I'm running MRP or looking at that data, I'm in the correct plan, because they might have different run times, they might have different sets of parameters that are controlling that output. So I don't want to be looking at information that's not important to me or not relevant to the scenario I'm looking for. So in terms of what you should do for an organization, is one plan right? Are multiple plans right? I think you need to take a look at the maturity of your planning organization. Do you do a lot of simulation planning? Do you have users who are able to navigate through the system clearly and know what screens to look at and feed that information, or do you want it very streamlined and simplified? You have one option when it comes to planned orders. Show me the planned orders that I'm supposed to react to. Don't show me everything. When it comes to messages, I don't want conflicting action and delay messages that tell me what my options are. Tell me what I should do. That sort of thing. When it comes to setting up your master plans, have that mindset. What makes sense for the ultimate person reacting to it? What makes sense for us to plan simulations, to plan forecasts? Do we do explosions for make to order from sales orders? If you do a lot of make to order, configure to order, you're going to at least probably want a separate dynamic plan so you can run some of those explosions without affecting the day-to-day operations. Just make sure your training's on top of it, right? Just make sure that you're seeing the forms that the users are using and they know when and how to switch to the master plans they need. So that's it for today. I hope that was helpful. And like I said, happy Master Planning Monday, and we'll talk to you all soon.